Picture showing up on your first day, feeling like a battle-hardened reporter. 2 decades of investigative journalism under your belt, only to discover the office looks more like a tech-themed daycare than a newsroom. Dan Lyons, 50 years old, and freshly laid off from Newsweek, walks through HubSpot's glass doors and is greeted by an employee in an orange shark costume handing out high fives. Instead of typewriters and editorial calendars, he sees ping-pong tables, neon motivational quotes, and an EDM soundtrack bouncing off the walls. The morning meeting doesn't start with audience metrics, but with a group war cry to change the world. Lyons' stomach turns. In this place, acting like an adult is practically an act of rebellion. The startup's supposed meritocracy quickly reveals itself as a stage play choreographed for 20-somethings willing to trade overtime for cold pizza and hashtags about purpose. Lyons learns that his experience, once an asset, is now a liability. Every reference to facts, historical context, or source verification is met with blank stares and polite yawns. He tries to tighten content using journalistic rigor. The response is a wall of colorful post-it notes and rocket ship emojis. The fail fast and learn mantra masks repetitive mistakes that any professional newsroom would crush. The gospel of innovation conveniently justifies discarding senior talent because admitting someone older knows better violates the millennial-first scripture. Weeks pass, and Lyons watches meteoric promotions handed to colleagues who master motivational GIFs but have never closed a serious deadline. The invisible hierarchy favors whoever is loudest on Slack, not whoever delivers verifiable results. This is fake meritocracy, a game that looks open but whose finish line shifts whenever an older employee gets close. The conflict peaks when Lyons suggests engagement metrics might be inflated. He's instantly labeled negative, the worst insult in a culture of mandatory optimism. In that moment, he understands there is no room for genuine experience in an ecosystem that worships youth as an end in itself. And the brutal question that hangs as he types a report no one will ever read is simple. When did professionalism become synonymous with being obsolete? Have you ever felt suffocated by a workplace that demands you smile, not as a reflection of joy, but as a mask of survival? That's what Dan Lyons discovers as he dives deeper into the startup world. Behind the colorful walls and slides connecting floors lies a culture that sells itself as youthful and fun, but underneath operates like an emotional pressure cooker dressed as a party. From the start, something feels off. Gongs echo through the office to celebrate even the smallest sales. Coworkers wear animal costumes during meetings. A company mascot dances through the hallways as if it were Disneyland with stock options. There are office games, morning gratitude, circles, emoji contests, and mandatory energy boost rituals. At first glance, it seems quirky, playful, but the illusion cracks quickly. What's sold as freedom is, in truth, a form of behavioral policing. Positivity is not an option. It's an obligation. You're not just working. You're performing joy. Expressing concern, offering criticism, or asking hard questions is treated like a betrayal of company spirit. If you keep your head down and focus, you're seen as antisocial. If you don't clap hard enough at the next dream big speech, you're tagged as unaligned. The hyper-informal environment is a smokescreen for constant emotional surveillance. Managers preach, we're all family, yet monitor your Slack activity, login times, and even your tone in meetings. Underneath all the fun, there's fear. Fear of seeming unmotivated. Fear of not fitting in. Fear of not being excited. Enough about the next team-building karaoke night. Lyons realizes that what really matters isn't performance, but enthusiasm. You're not measured by your work, but by your willingness to cheer, smile, and post on LinkedIn how grateful you are to be part of this amazing culture. It's toxic positivity at its finest, a culture immune to feedback, a system where authenticity is crushed beneath layers of fake celebration. The informal vibe doesn't liberate, it controls. And in this theater of forced happiness, the ones who refuse to dance are labeled as dangerous. Because all this plastic joy isn't about well-being. It's about obedience. Dan Lyons didn't just join a tech company. He stepped into a well-funded illusion. The mission was clear. We're changing the world with software. But it only took a few weeks for him to see what really powered the machine. It wasn't innovation. It was investor money. HubSpot, like so many other Silicon Valley darlings, thrived not on product excellence, but on narrative. The stated goal? Empower small businesses. But beneath that noble purpose, Dan uncovered a system fueled by venture capital burned at blistering speed to pay salaries, fund parties, throw flashy events, and push aggressive marketing, all while profit remained a perpetually postponed dream. Inside the company walls, what mattered wasn't sustainability. It was hype, growth at all costs, even if that growth was artificially inflated and dangerously fragile. Executives celebrated empty KPIs like blog views, lead generation numbers, and social media likes, while hiding the absurd cost of customer acquisition. It was a metric-fueled circus, built not for value, but for visibility. Dan saw that the true goal of these startups wasn't to change the world. It was to change investor perception long enough to go public or get acquired. Most are called innovations. Were little more than buzzwords wrapped in sleek design. The focus wasn't on building something great. It was on looking great. Beneath it all was a culture of growth hacking, where manipulating algorithms, exaggerating numbers, and pushing aggressive sales were not exceptions, but strategies. And anyone who dared to question the model's fundamentals was dismissed as negative, as someone who just doesn't get it. But Dan got it. Coming from journalism, a world where facts matter more than branding, he saw through the illusion fast. Startups weren't chasing truth. They were chasing valuation. And in that race for funding rounds, the product becomes secondary, truth becomes inconvenient, and the world these companies claim to improve is simply a backdrop for their next investor pitch. The greatest innovation in Silicon Valley isn't technology. It's storytelling. Dan Lyons quickly realized that many startups aren't selling products. They're selling narratives. And the more vague the narrative, the more powerful it becomes. Buzzwords like disruption, exponential scale, collaborative intelligence, or digital transformation echo through meetings, pitch decks, and TED-style talks. No one fully understands what they mean. And maybe that's exactly the point. The innovation culture has become a marketing performance. Products still in beta are announced as revolutions. Average platforms declare themselves unicorns. Any attempt to question substance is drowned out by polished language, sleek infographics, and inspirational background music. The logic is simple. In the startup world, looking revolutionary matters more than being solid. In this theater of illusions, the CEO becomes a prophet. No longer just a leader, he is elevated into a visionary. He delivers vague, poetic lines on conference stages, while employees and investors nod in awe. Startup culture builds idols out of charisma, not results. CEOs who haven't built a single profitable product are treated as geniuses. Their quotes are printed on posters. Their every move romanticized by the brand they represent. Dan watched as marketing overtook strategy. Slogans replaced substance. Design triumphed over depth. In many cases, marketing wasn't a function of the product. It was the product. The real mission wasn't to solve a problem. It was to make people believe there was a problem, and that only this startup could solve it. even if the solution was more illusion than function. This is how bubbles are built. Not with code, but with belief. Not with profit, but with performance. And the more people believe the story, the more the illusion becomes market truth. Until one day, the spell breaks. And what remains is a simple question. What did this company actually deliver? Dan Lyons learns that the freedom preached by startups comes shackled in silicon. Every email he sends is filtered for keywords. Every click on a document logs a timestamp. Every minute spent typing in Slack is tracked by engagement software. Even mood is quantified. Daily surveys ask him to rate his feelings with sad, neutral, or happy emojis. Officially, these data help improve the workplace. Yet, in practice, they feed an emotional surveillance dashboard that flags anyone who seems demotivated or critical. The slide screening culture masks a panopticon. During hiring, the promise is bright. Join us, grow with us, become a leader in a few years. Onboarding decks overflow with success stories of 20-somethings promoted 3 times in one review cycle. But on the ground, promotions turn to mirages. Criteria shift, targets move, org charts reshuffle without warning. The career rocket ship narrows near the top, and most employees discover too late that those seats are reserved for founders, inner circle friends, or big-name outsiders hired at richer salaries. The contradiction crystallizes when the people-first mantra crashes into a revenue shortfall. In a lackluster quarter, the same leaders who preached purpose and belonging gather everyone in the cafeteria to announce layoffs. There are chilly hugs, speeches about strategic realignment, and promises of transition support. Minutes later, badges are deactivated, logins wiped, colleagues erased from Slack as though they never existed. Lyons notes the cruel irony. The startup claiming to reinvent work reenacts the oldest model of all, squeezing maximum energy from each employee until the storyline demands a cut, then swapping bodies for the next funding milestone. In this environment, real competence isn't creativity or productivity. It is the ability to maintain enthusiasm under surveillance, stomach broken promises, and clap for layoffs while #family hashtags still trend in company channels. The universal growth promise is the bait. Monitoring is the line. The cold layoff is the moment the fish realizes the hook was always marketing. Dan Lyons stepped into the startup world with the same hope shared by many seasoned professionals. Tired of rigid corporate structures and legacy hierarchies, he believed that perhaps, just perhaps, these tech-driven companies were the answer, promising innovation, speed, meaning. He wasn't naive. He had survived journalism, lived through chaos and pressure, but he still held on to the idea that experience could find value in this so-called brave new world. At first, Dan tried to play along. He laughed at the Slack memes, showed up at team-building events, gave feedback with a forced sense of enthusiasm. He used the right emojis, adopted the startup lingo, learned the internal tools, even when they felt like puzzles designed to generate vanity metrics rather than value. But behind the cheerful culture, he began to see something hollow. He found himself producing content that felt empty. Buzzwords without meaning, articles optimized for clicks rather than insight. Meetings were saturated with jargon and feedback. Loops were designed to reinforce the illusion of progress. He realized that deep thought, criticism, or reflection were not welcome. In this world, thinking too much was dangerous. Agreeing blindly was rewarded. The frustration began to grow, not in an explosive way, but as a slow-burning awareness. He felt disconnected, not because of his age, but because of his clarity. He missed writing with purpose. He missed creating something that actually meant something. Instead, he was churning out fluff, designed to fuel growth decks and investor dreams, not improve lives. His departure wasn't dramatic. It was the end of a disillusionment process, Like a journalist watching his newsroom turn into a clickbait factory, Dan simply knew it was time to walk away. He wasn't hated. He just didn't fit. He asked, why, when everyone else was trained to smile and say, yes. Dan Lyons' experience is not just about one company. It's about a culture that promises meaning but delivers performance theater. He left with no bitterness, only insight. And then, as all great writers do, he told the world the truth behind the facade. Dan Lyons exposes a bitter truth few in the startup world dare to acknowledge. The so-called tech revolution is increasingly led by a narrow demographic of young, privileged white men who turn workspaces into frat house playgrounds. This, brothers, culture, a cocktail of juvenile antics, shallow charisma, and blind hype worship, doesn't promote innovation. It promotes conformity dressed up as disruption. When Lyons, in his 50s, steps into this world, he immediately realizes that his decades of journalistic insight, critical thinking, and emotional maturity are not simply undervalued. They are seen as liabilities. Wisdom is unwelcome. The calm voice of someone who's seen real market crashes is drowned out by the cheers of 20-somethings shouting, "Crush it!" in hoodies. In this world, immaturity isn't a flaw, it's a badge of honor. Toxic masculinity is rebranded as entrepreneurial spirit, and questioning the norm is viewed as negativity. This culture doesn't just ignore difference, it repels it. Women, older workers, people of color, and anyone who doesn't perform the role of a hyped-up tech bro are subtly and systematically excluded. It's not merely a lack of gender or racial diversity, it's a rejection of cognitive diversity. These startups call themselves radical, but their culture mirrors that of a cult. Unspoken rules, groupthink, charismatic gurus, and an intolerance for dissent. All of it funded by investors who fall for the story that this is how the future is built. Lyons unmasked the truth. Behind the Nerf guns and beanbags lies a rigid, exclusionary structure dressed in pastel colors and GIFs. A system that talks of fun and family, but manages its people like disposable assets. A system that tracks your positivity score on internal dashboards while handing out cold layoffs through Slack messages. And perhaps most disturbingly, it teaches young professionals that this is normal, even desirable. While working at HubSpot, Dan Lyons uncovers a harsh and unsettling truth behind the polished surface of startup culture. Much of what is branded as innovation is little more than recycled ideas, wrapped in sleek UX and buzzwords. The word disruption has become so overused, so hollow, that even the most trivial tech tweaks are paraded as world-changing revolutions. At the heart of this illusion is a kind of innovation that has nothing to do with purpose or progress. It's not about solving real problems anymore. It's about performing innovation, acting innovative enough to attract investor attention and balloon valuations. Startups spend more energy crafting TED-style pitches and culture decks than building useful, reliable products. The user is not the real customer. The investor is. Lyons peels back the curtain and reveals companies founded on bloated mission statements that don't translate into meaningful work. Software that merely automates cold emails is pitched as a paradigm shift. CRM dashboards become engines of transformation. The real product is the hype, and hype is monetized. The result is a market flooded with tools no one really needs. Sold with Silicon Valley charm and startup flair, he captures the rot beneath the glitter. Products rush to market not because they're ready, but because timing is everything in the venture funding game. Metrics are gamified, success is fabricated, and fake it till you make it becomes a business model. This is not innovation. It's innovation theater, a spectacle that prioritizes optics over impact, narratives over necessity, and returns over responsibility. Lyons doesn't write like a hater. He writes like someone who wanted to believe. Someone who walked into the startup world expecting meaning, and emerged with a bitter realization. In this new form of capitalism, innovation is no longer the goal, it's the costume, and purpose is optional. Dan Lyons pinpoints a brutal paradox at the heart of the modern startup office. Everyone looks happy, yet almost no one feels whole. He recalls walking into HubSpot's open kitchen and watching a daily ritual that blended organic cereal, rainbow smoothies, and group selfies. Laughter echoed, pop music pumped through smart speakers, and posters promised impact for billions. But when the phone cameras dimmed, he caught empty stares and sagging shoulders. Each employee wore a grin that slipped the second the Slack upload bar reached 100%. Alienation thrived through a relentless parade of micro-events engineered to fill every gap of silence. Mindfulness at 9, motivational keynote at 11, coffee chat with the VP at 3, themed happy hour at 5. The hyperactive calendar projected camaraderie, but operated as anesthesia. No one had the time or the nerve to ask why they were doing the work or who truly benefited. The fear of seeming negative outweighed the hunger for meaning. The more playful the schedule, the deeper the individual loneliness grew. Lyons recounts whispered hallway confessions, where colleagues admitted they had no idea what their real contribution was. Projects pivoted weekly. Metrics chased numbers. Nobody could translate into value, and gratitude arrived in the form of gamified badges, while late-night anxiety spiked before review weeks. Psychological reward came from internal likes, not external impact. Belonging was a glossy container in which purpose and authenticity quietly evaporated. He concludes that suffering in such environments does not stem from overwork, but from undermeaning. Instead of physical burnout, employees endure existential burnout, swallowing job loss fear and numbing it with branded slogans. That is when the amazing culture shows its true face. A loud stage drowning out doubt, turning creative humans into captive spectators of a non-stop show of mandatory positivity. Dan Lyons' book is more than a personal journey. It is a piercing dissection of the so-called new capitalism, dressed in hoodies and mission statements, yet fueled by the same cold logic of extraction, disposability, and illusion. Startups love to market themselves as utopias. Bright offices, nap pods, kombucha on tap. Words like family, disruption, and impact are plastered across walls and pitch decks. But behind this curated image, Lyons reveals a darker truth, that many of these companies are not engines of value, but machines of appearance. Employees are told they're family, yet fired in mass layoffs announced via Slack. They're encouraged to change the world, but often work on soulless projects that chase vanity metrics rather than meaningful impact. Beneath the glossy culture lies a ruthless efficiency where people are resources, celebrated when productive, discarded without sentiment when no longer useful. Lyons strips back the narrative to show how today's startup culture is less about innovation and more about theater. He exposes how venture capital turns founders into messianic figures and company missions into gospel. Dissent becomes blasphemy. Skepticism is unwelcome. You're either all in or you're not a cultural fit. And worst of all, this religion of entrepreneurship convinces young professionals to burn themselves out in the name of passion. It sells a fantasy where anyone can be the next unicorn founder, if only they hustle hard enough. But in truth, most are just fuel for someone else's exit strategy. This is the paradox Lyons forces us to confront. The new capitalism looks friendlier, feels freer, and speaks the language of meaning. But too often, it delivers exploitation. In disguise, it's not building a better future. It's mastering the art of looking like it is dot, and in the end, that might be the most dangerous illusion of all. If you're a professional looking for meaning, an entrepreneur building your dream, or an investor searching for the next unicorn, Dan Lyons' book is more than a memoir. It's a wake-up call. First, accept this uncomfortable truth. Not every startup that calls itself innovative is actually solving anything. Real innovation fixes real problems. Faux innovation wraps itself in buzzwords, flashy branding, and bloated valuation models. Lyons exposes how many companies thrive, not because they're strong businesses, but because they're hype machines fueled by investor FOMO and shallow promises. Professionals must learn to spot the warning signs of toxic culture disguised as fun. When every day feels like a forced party, when positivity becomes mandatory, when transparency means surveillance and collaboration means compliance, run. That's not culture. That's corporate theater playing dress-up. Entrepreneurs should take a long, honest look in the mirror. Are you building something with substance, or are you crafting an illusion? Are you driven by impact or addicted to scale? Lyons' experience shows that chasing hype is like building a house on sand. If there's no purpose behind the product, or if the product itself is just noise, the collapse is only a matter of time. And to the investors, beware the charming pitch deck. Beware the charismatic founder who sells dreams louder than they build reality. Metrics can be gamed. Culture can be staged. What matters most is traction, product-market fit, real customer value. Lyons reminds us that it's not the sizzle that survives, it's the steak. It's not the round that matters, it's the return. So here are the filters that truly matter. Authenticity over aesthetics. Clarity over charisma. Purpose over performance theater. Sustainable execution over explosive promises. If you're going to put your career, your capital, or your heart into a venture, make sure it's built on something real. Because in a world addicted to looking disruptive, being real is the most disruptive thing you can do. The truth is, this disrupted isn't just a takedown of one company. It's a mirror reflecting the excesses, illusions, and contradictions of today's startup-driven capitalism. Dan Lyons exposes what most are too afraid to admit behind the slides, and slogans lie exhausted people, hollow purposes, and distorted values. If this video made you pause, made you rethink where you work, what you're building, or where you're investing, then the full book will hit even harder. Dan doesn't just tell a story. He dissects an entire system that promises revolution but often delivers nothing more than noise. If you want to dive deeper into this eye-opening experience, you'll find the link to the book in the description or the pinned comment. And remember, not all disruption is progress. Sometimes it's just chaos dressed as innovation.